A very good day to everyone. Today I want to talk about the myth of Narcissus, but perhaps not in the usual way many people talk about it, because lots of us, we know that the myth of Narcissus is a classic Greek myth, and I'll resort to the Ovidius version that is the most well-known. And in this myth, that, as you will see, has a very interesting psychological interpretation, there is this very handsome young Greek man, Narcissus, and Narcissus is walking around and following his own life, and this nymph from the mountain with the name Echo falls in love with him, follows him because she's madly in love, but he feels that he's being followed and he asks who is there, and she just echoes, she answers, who is there? But he notices her and he rejects the nymph. And she dies alone, she sort of dissolves, and all that remains from her is the echo. It's her sound, in a way. Well, then Narcissus is following his life, but Nemesis, the Greek goddess of revenge, and she is also known as one aspect of Aphrodite, Nemesis takes notice of this story and wants revenge because of what happened, and so she lures Narcissus into a pond where he sees his own reflection, and he falls madly in love with himself, considering that the reflection is really another being, another person in a way. But of course he cannot consummate his love, and he actually ends up dissolving, disappearing in the fire of his own passion. And all that remains is a narcissus flower. It's a daffodil. Well, this is the classic version. Then we have psychologists interpreting this version, thinking that it's about the way we can actually, in a way, fall in love with ourselves, become egotistic, self-centered, ignore other people, be incapable of a real resonance, empathy towards others. Then we have the narcissistic personality disorder and all sorts of versions for that. But what if there were a deeper, different, more esoteric interpretation? Let's imagine that in the way we might also interpret dreams, we think about the myth as representing parts of ourselves. Well, then, Narcissus is probably the personal ego following his own evolutionary path, and this personal ego, at a certain moment, starts ignoring even the voice of the echo coming from the mountains. Mountains are already a symbol for a path upwards or evolution. But anyway, this personal ego starts ignoring the echoes of himself because he's no longer interested in just repeating being a personal self, being just an ordinary human being, compromised with mundane appeals. So he rejects this echo, he's moving away from it, and it sort of fades away. And now he finds his own reflection in a painful path somehow. That is actually the path of self-transcendence. And he falls in love with this image of himself. But at the same time, he's looking at the water, and the water is also a symbol of passage to other worlds, other dimensions, eventually higher ones. And so Narcissus looks at himself because he has been lured into doing so by the goddess of love, as in the version, the revengeful version of Nemesis, and he falls in love, But what is he falling in love with? I would say it could be the higher soul. He could now have found that he has a deeper soul, a beautiful one indeed, because the soul typically is beautiful, it's shining, it's full of light and inspiration and so on. And because he falls in love with his higher soul, he cannot reach it, he cannot consummate love, because if he just remains as a personal self, he cannot do that. So then he dissolves himself as a personal ego in the fire of love. He becomes something else, and this might be a symbol for the divine marriage, the conjunction, the marriage of our feminine and masculine side, of our concrete lower nature, and the higher nature can be a marriage of ourselves with the divine within, and so on. Then he dissolves himself as a personal self, a personal ego, and all that remains is a daffodil, a narcissus flower. Well, the daffodil has 6 petals and a central flourishing area. Let's imagine that the 6 petals correspond with the number 6 to the seal of Solomon, the 6-pointed star, where we find a triangle that typically might represent our mundane human nature, united with a higher triangle representing the divine within us. And then there is this central flourishing and the idea of the flower could also make us think about chakras, of course, centers of energy. But this unity of the divine principle with our personal self produces indeed a transcendence and a dissolution of what we consider ourselves to be. Usually we become something else because our divine inner nature takes possession of our life and who we are. There is an inner flourishing then. That's all that remains in the end of the myth of Narcissus. And well, this is my proposition for a different interpretation of this myth. And as usually, if you like it, comment, share, and eventually subscribe to the channel. And I'll be later coming back.